Raymond?
Okay, can I start? Dear members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar, The Deep Space Effect, Culture and the Human Space Program, organized by the Cultural Considerations Working Group of the Moon Village Association. I am Remo Rapetti, co-chair of the working group. The subject of today's webinar is again the deep space effect. That is the reaction of human beings when facing the interplanetary void and when losing all the known reference points in space. In our recent first webinar about the same subject, we already focused on what we know about this reaction, according to several testimonies of the astronauts interviewed by Frank White for his books, The Overview Effect and The Cosmos Hypothesis. Today, we intend to go forward and investigate the possible consequences on human culture and how we could organize an efficient universal program for exploring and developing the solar system. No one better than Frank White, again, could deal with these issues. And he was so kind to accept our invitation and will be the key speaker today. He will speak about deep space and space migration. At the end of his presentation, an all-Italian panel of interviewers will add comments and ask questions. Giuseppe Ribaldi, founder and president of the MVA, who, by the way, suggested the very effective definition of the space effect. Giulio Prisco, an active member of our working group, author, and editor of the website turingchair.com. And Professor Stefano Catucci, philosopher and author of the book Learning from the Moon. In the end, there will also be a chance for the attendees to ask questions of Frank and the panelists under the guide of Arthur Woods, co-chair of our working group. And now, Frank, please, you can start your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Remo. You know, I've told people before, I don't know what I think until I write about it. I don't know what I think till I do a PowerPoint. And honestly, I really have to thank all of you for inviting me, because I didn't fully know what I thought about the topic until you asked me to present. And as I worked on the PowerPoint, I came to some conclusions I did not have in my mind at the beginning. And I'm very interested in sharing them with you. And I'm very interested in what you think of them, because they are quite fresh, kind of new for me. And so let me see if I can share my screen. Here we go. Okay. All right. I not only want to share it, but I want to.
You want the full screen?
Yeah, I do want the full screen. Give me a minute. I need to, I think, get rid of the doc. So here we go. Okay. Bring it up a little bit more. Sorry, everyone. I'm trying to get to that point where I can show you the full screen. Okay, we're there now. Don't know what that is. Now, there we go.
Great.
So, Deep Space 2, Culture and the Human Space Program. We're also going to get into space migration. Hello, I hear some voices. Okay, here we go. So I could talk all day about this, and if you want me to, I will, but I think you'd get kind of tired. So I'm going to make three main points. One point I made in the previous webinar, and that was that space exploration transforms human consciousness. Second point I did not share before, it's all about love, believe it or not. And the third is a global transformation in consciousness as a result of space exploration may be much closer than we think. Let me get to my 3 points. So let's just set the stage with the overview effect and the deep space effect. As I talked about previously, the overview effect was originally an idea that I had about people who lived permanently off of the Earth. It was not about astronauts and their experiences. It was about people of the future living on the moon or in freestanding communities between the Earth and the moon. They would always see the Earth in the sky. And this illustration summarizes that idea. They'd always see the Earth as a whole system, interconnected, interrelated. They would have an understanding of our planet that we are struggling to grasp. What I didn't do any work on to speak of, and that's why I'm grateful for this idea, is what about being on the moon on the far side? It's the opposite. The Earth would not be in the sky. Instead, you'd be looking out into the universe all the time. And if you think about it, that's just as profound. However, interviewing astronauts, they are still good proxies because they do see the Earth, but they also look outward into the void. And there's more work to be done. But, you know, I think some of what I'm going to share with you today will shed light on the far side. I guess that's a pun because we call it the dark side. So I'll shed some light on the dark side of the moon. When I first was writing the overview effect in the 1980s, it occurred to me that one of the great things about space exploration was precisely my first point. It transforms our consciousness. Who are we? Where are we? Where are we going? And I had a three-stage hierarchy. The overview effect would be what happens on suborbital hops, orbital missions, and lunar missions. The Copernican perspective would be an understanding that Copernicus was right. We're also part of the solar system, not just of the Earth. That would happen on missions to Mars. And then there would be the universal insight, a greater and greater connection to the cosmos. Perhaps that would result from going deeper and deeper into the solar system. The basic idea here was the greater distance you travel from the Earth, the greater the impact. And I had a moment of thinking, excuse me, this is my sidekick here. I had a moment of thinking that I had actually come up with an Einsteinian type of breakthrough. I'm just going to take a pause, folks. I have to move to another room. Hold on a minute. Give me a moment. Sorry. I'll take you with me here on this trip. Sorry for the interruption. Okay. Okay, apologies everyone. So I had this, stop. All right, I had this idea that the impact of the overview effect would be equal to the distance from the Earth times the time spent away, plus openness to the experience. And that seemed intuitively obvious. In other words, it seemed that people who went to the moon had a bigger shift in consciousness than people who just went into orbit. And it seemed that if you spent a lot of time on the International Space Station, there was more impact. And it seemed clear that the more open you were to the experience, the more you got out of it. I don't think it's totally wrong, but it's not complete. And that is something I've learned from interviewing commercial astronauts. I've really come to a more holistic view that's non-hierarchical, that these shifts may not be linear. The impact could be a mix of responses, and distance and time may not be as big a variable as they seem to be. So imagine an astronaut could have a mix of overview effect, Copernican perspective, deep space effect, universal insight. The key, though, is that your identity shifts from seeing yourself as a part to seeing yourself as part of a whole. And I always feel like, starting with the overview effect, the best thing to do is start with what astronauts actually say. And I shared some astronaut experiences last time I was with you, and I wanted to share another one that I did not share before. This is a very powerful response to not just seeing the Earth, but seeing it as being alive, a living entity. And this particular astronaut was one that I interviewed him at Johnson Space Center in 2019, and it's part of a remarkable series that NASA has produced called Down to Earth. So it's about 3 minutes long, and let me just share with you what he has to say.
I had looked at pictures on social media and pictures in NASA archives of the Earth so many times, I actually started to get worried. What if I get up there and it's just like the pictures? I mean, that's going to be weird if that's the thing where I'm like, oh, it looks just like the pictures. I'm ready to go home now. And then on the Soyuz, my launch vehicle, launched with the Russians. And on my Soyuz, when I first got a chance to look out my little window, which is about right here at the Earth, there's something about looking out a round window at the curvature of the Earth that makes it just more pronounced and really makes it have a huge impact. I just had this feeling like I was way up high looking down, and we were over the ocean, and the blues that I saw, it was ridiculous. I'd never imagined in my entire life getting to see something that beautiful. It was so foreign for the human mind to look at that, to see that total black of space, to see the Earth highlighted that way. And then I got to see a sunset. I had one piece of paper, it had a picture of my kids on it and a few of my flight data file burn times on it. But I just took a pencil and I drew like 15 curved lines, and I just wrote light blue, darker blue, pink, purple, dark purple, all the way down to the surface of the Earth at sunset, because the scale of looking at a sun refracting through the atmosphere, it blew me away, and no picture captures that. There's no high enough dynamic range of a photo to capture what the human can see. So that first look outside completely sidelined me. I had a GoPro, and I made a recording to my brother of, no matter how much it costs in the future, come do this. You have to come do this. I mean, it's amazing. Over my 6 months in space, getting to look at the Earth every single day, it shows you something different. Every day it shows you that it's alive. It's a being just like we are. We're guests on this planet. And It's our mother, it's our father, it's our starship cruising around the sun in the middle of the solar system. There was never a moment that I looked out the window and didn't immediately grab a camera to take a picture of something that our planet was doing. It always surprised you. It's always magnificent. I'm a pilot, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a poet, but certainly when you're in low Earth orbit, looking down at the Earth, it doesn't matter if you're a physicist, a school teacher, a stay-at-home parent, or maybe you just backpack for your whole life. If you look out, you're going to have a magical experience in your own way, for certain.
So this change in awareness, the overview effect, we've now come to know about it. We know that astronauts say, oh, you know, there are no borders or boundaries on the Earth, except the ones we create in our mind. It's incredibly beautiful. The atmosphere that protects us is very thin. And more recently, they're starting to talk about the Earth as a living thing, a living entity, not just a whole system, but a living system. And I like to point out that this is the first space community. We're in space. We'll always be in space. This is the first one that life has created. Don't forget, there was a period when there was not life on Earth. It arose here. And we're now contemplating expanding outward to other aspects or other parts of the universe. But we're already there. What we're now creating is mobility and the ability to get away from our spaceship and to understand it a lot better. So let me move on to another person who will report.
It is small. I was not surprised to see that.
Give me a moment. I just want to introduce this. This is not an astronaut, of course, this is me, but it's the beginning of a commentary by Jean-Francois Clairvoy, an ESA and NASA astronaut whom I interviewed. Again, he went into orbit. He went to the International Space Station, like Reed Wiseman. And he reveals something that I'm seeing more and more with people who experience the overview effect. And that is a love of the Earth. My friend Rod Pyle, who edits the Ad Astra magazine, he likes to say, you know, Frank, space hates people. And he says that because space is a harsh place. The cosmos is not well designed for us. Earth is, but the rest of the cosmos isn't. And I like to say, yes, Rod, but people love space. We just love the idea of going out there and exploring and seeing what's going on out there in the cosmos. And I've come after 35 years of trying to understand the overview effect. I can summarize it in one word, I think. It's love. It's love of the Earth, it's love of space, it's love of the cosmos. And people are always asking me, hey, can you experience the overview effect without leaving the Earth? And I say, no, it's an astronaut experience. Well, you know, you can't see the Earth from orbit or from a distance without leaving it. But if you've ever been in love or ever felt love, you do know something about the overview effect. You can see behind me my puppy, Maisie Dobbs. Well, I love Maisie. And I'm sure everybody who's watching knows what that emotion is like. And I'm just going to let Jean-Francois talk a little bit about it because he says it better than I do.
I was not surprised to see that.
Oh, sorry, wrong guy. Here we go.
Imagine the Earth, it is So it is small. It is. I mean, small like this. It is limited. It is on the background of the black sky, and there is nothing else than the sun and the moon around. Nothing else. And you love it. You know, you develop a feel of love, like you love your partner, you love your kids. You love the planet. It's not only awe, admiration. It's not only feeling the sense of a creator somewhere, because it's too beautiful to be just by chance. Mm-hmm. I felt love for Earth. It was very strong, and I think it's maybe more the feel of love than the beauty that made me cry and feel my eyes, wet by tears.
Yeah. I don't think most of us consider astronauts to be the kind of people who cry. But I've interviewed more than one now who has told me, I cried when I first saw the Earth from orbit. I think this is very important. I talk about the overview effect as a cognitive shift in awareness, but it's an emotional shift. And it is love. It is an affection for creation, if you will, that is at the heart of it. Now, the two astronauts I showed you went into orbit, or they went to the ISS. When we come to commercial spaceflight like Blue Origin, I've had people tell me, Frank, you cannot experience the overview effect on a suborbital flight. I've read your book. I know all about the overview effect. And you cannot possibly experience it on a suborbital flight. You're too close to the Earth. It's too fast. It's too quick. No. And I've always said, why don't we wait and see? Before Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, we'd only had a couple of suborbital flights. Now, I've been doing research on suborbital astronauts, and I'm really quite surprised at what I'm finding. It's relevant to the deep space effect, and it's also why I am saying that we may see a very profound shift in global awareness much quicker than we expect. So this is Chris Bosshausen, who flew on a Blue Origin flight. And he starts out saying, yes, I did have the overview effect. I knew about the Earth because of my work as a member of the space industry. I was aware of that. But then he talks about what surprised him.
I was not surprised to see that the Earth was indeed the fragile nursery in which we were born. I already knew that, but it was beautiful to see it. But I think for me, the really profound experience was the vastness of space and the depth of the view, and seeing the horizon an impossibly far distance away, and the sort of pool of space. And that's the part where I think my explorer gene was triggered. Definitely felt like something awakened within me, which was a compulsion to explore further.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about seeing the Earth from space and in space. Yeah. From space, yes, you see the Earth and you have these realizations about it, but perhaps more profound is that it's in the universe, or it's in the cosmos. Is that kind of what you're saying? Is that?
Yeah, and I coined a new phrase, riffing off your idea, which I call the outer view effect.
Okay.
And so William Shatner, I would say, got a very strong dose of the overview effect. And, I think he was as representative of a layperson flying to space as anybody else. He didn't know a lot about the industry, to be honest. In my case, I got the outer view effect, which was, I can't believe that's there, and I've got to go. I mean, I look up at the stars, I look at the moon, but that pales in comparison to the tug I felt in my chest looking out at space.
Really?
of the atmosphere. Yeah, it was a very profound. Even if I close my eyes now, I can kind of feel an acceleration from the core of my body that feels like me being pulled out into space.
That was just an excerpt of my interview with him, which is on YouTube if you want to see the whole thing. But he said a number of things that I think are incredibly important for the future. He mentioned the explorer gene. There is evidence that some 20% of the population is inclined to explore genetically, not necessarily explore outer space, but maybe do medical research, maybe become an astronomer, maybe just become a risk taker. But he said he felt like his explorer gene was triggered or brought forth. And that's an important thing about the research on the explorer gene. You can have it, but if society doesn't support it, you aren't likely to have it expressed. He also talked about looking out into the vastness of the universe, which I would relate to the deep space effect. And he talked about a tug, a pull, a desire to go further. He wants to go back. So what we can imagine is if more people could have that experience, we could also imagine more people wanting to go farther and to have large-scale space migration become far more likely, but also a much greater understanding of the Earth and its place in the universe. The second person I'm going to share with you is Sarah Sabri. She was the second citizen astronaut from Space for Humanity. She also flew on a Blue Origin flight. And again, bear in mind, these flights are 12 minutes long, and they just go right past the Kármán line, and that is it.
Is there any way to summarize briefly what you think changed?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the biggest things for me was the lack of separation between Earth and space. And because we've always used the terms space and Earth kind of separate from each other, and we always thought, okay, we're doing things on Earth here, and then like there are certain things that are going to be done for space. But for me, when I was up there, I realized that there's no actual separation between the two. The Earth is just a continuation of it, and we're just a part of this much bigger thing. And that to me, when that clicked, it just like was, oh, like it makes sense why we're doing what we're doing. It makes sense for us to need to explore it. It makes sense for us to need to understand more of it because it is us. We are it. And that was the biggest thing for me. And I think I was more on the side of looking towards the outside. Like I felt this connection between Earth and space more than anything. It just felt so part of one another that it was so hard. It's so hard for me to separate the two now. It's just, I think that was the most overwhelming feeling that I felt from this whole experience.
So once again, it's one thing to say, as I do, we are in space, we've always been in space, we'll always be in space. But Sarah experienced that reality. And I do believe one of the biggest problems we have in the world today regarding understanding the enterprise of space exploration is Earth, space, Earth, space. Somehow it's a dichotomy. Instead of what she said is, it's all really part of the same thing. So to summarize, we have these surprising results of these suborbital hops. I could show you many more, but we don't have time. First of all, one that I'm not showing you is Dylan Taylor, who flew on Blue Origin. He said, yes, you can experience the overview effect on a suborbital hop. But what interests me, and I think maybe even more important, you might experience something else. You might experience a more advanced state of transformation, maybe even the deep space effect, without even going to the moon. This is for us to explore much more. However, what really struck me here is a question. Is commercial spaceflight the Chat GPT of spaceflight? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I have followed artificial intelligence as long as I've followed spaceflight. The first use of the term was in 1955 when a group of scholars gathered at Dartmouth College in the United States. They coined the phrase artificial intelligence, and they said they thought a computer could eventually simulate everything a human could do. And since 1955, people have been working on that. In 1957, Sputnik launched, and we had the space age. There's been work on AI all of those years, but I think for most of us who were not involved in it, it was something separate from us. It was not something we thought would really have a direct effect on our lives. And all of a sudden, 4 or 5 months ago, OpenAI, which was co-founded by Elon Musk, came out with a program called ChatGPT. It was put out there for free. Anyone could use it. It's easy to use, and it's having a tremendous disruptive effect. Anybody who's an educator knows it's having a huge impact because suddenly there's a tool that students can use, and it's pretty good at writing essays, for example. And suddenly artificial intelligence has moved from being over here to being in the mainstream. I think many of us thought, by analogy to spaceflight, it was going to be a long time before people like us, let's say we'll call ourselves ordinary people, not NASA astronauts, before we could experience these changes in consciousness and before large numbers of people could experience them. But this may not be true. It may be upon us, like ChatGPT. New Shepard, for example, the spacecraft of Blue Origin that's taking people into these suborbital hops. It may be a precursor to something like AI. Now, what you're seeing here, this picture, it's not ChatGPT, it's a cousin of ChatGPT called DALL-E 2. And with DALL-E 2, you prompt it just in the same way that you prompt chat. You prompt it with a phrase, and then it will produce an image. So I asked it to show me Frank White on a Blue Origin flight experiencing the overview effect. Hold on just a minute. I have to close the door. Hang on. Apologize for the interruptions. So this is what it produced. Again, AI is also democratizing the artistic realm. So what I'm seeing is shifts in space philosophy and perspective and understanding that could happen much more quickly than I imagined. It goes back to a quote that I shared last time from Nicole Stott, who said, "We may be small in the grand scale of the universe, but from the standpoint of significance, I think in terms of here's this planet that's placed at a specific distance from the sun that allows us to live as we do and created this environment that is a perfect place for us to survive." And when you look out and see the cosmos and realize this Earth is the only place we know of right now where we can survive without special equipment, it gives you a greater appreciation of the Earth and of the universe. which comes back to my theory of the cosmos hypothesis. And it's a feeling not only of unity with the planet, but with the entire cosmos. Edgar Mitchell felt that unity. Other NASA astronauts did too. But I really thought you had to go to the moon to get that, and maybe to the far side of the moon. But Chris Bosshausen felt drawn outward into the universe on a suborbital hop. The Blue Origin astronauts I've interviewed, they talk about the blackness of space as much as the blue of Earth. Right now, it's very expensive to go on a Virgin Galactic flight or a Blue Origin flight, but it's in the interest of these companies to bring those costs down, to have that experience shared with many, many more people. And that's why I'm saying a shift in global consciousness could happen sooner than expected. And that shift could also draw more and more people into the idea of living off of the planet, living in space cultures. And when we come to culture and how it's going to evolve, it's not going to be homogeneous. People who live on the near side of the moon and people who live on the far side of the moon, they're going to have different cultures. People who live in an O'Neill style community between the Earth and Moon, they're going to have a different culture. Martians are going to be different. If we figure out how to live on Venus, they'll be different. There's no reason to think there is going to be a space culture. Look at all the cultures we have here on Earth. We're going to have a multitude of cultures outward as we leave planet, as we leave our first space community and create new space communities. One of the thoughts that I have been pondering is what's going to hold all of that together? How will there be any unity in these cultures? And, you know, the overview effect is a remarkable symbol of unity for the diverse cultures here on Earth. But what happens when we leave? And that leads to the idea of the human space program. When I was writing the first edition of the overview effect, it was so clear talking to astronauts that exploring the universe was too big a job for one country, one space program, or one organization. I heard about the idea of a central project. The idea of a central project is a society-wide effort to do something, like build cathedrals, for example, bringing together diverse people on one focal point. And I then, in the first edition, proposed that we should create a human space program as a central project for all of humanity. We should engage every person on Earth in the entire effort, which might take 1,000 years, to move out into the solar ecosystem and begin to explore the universe together. Now, at this point, there is a human space program. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. It's been incorporated in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And our purpose is to create a sustainable, ethical, and inclusive evolution of humanity into the solar ecosystem. Our plan is to create 16 task forces focused on key issues like ethics, the environment, economics, and religion. We're going to create a repository of knowledge, a database with relevant information that the task forces can use, and out of that create a blueprint, a plan for human evolution outward. All of that may sound very familiar, but one of the things we're going to do that's going to differentiate us, we're going to do simulations of our blueprint. We're going to challenge the blueprint, and we're going to see how it holds up under different circumstances. We're in the process of creating a computer model that will extend the work that was done with limits to growth at MIT back in the 1970s, which looked at a series of variables regarding Earth and its use of resources. We're going to extend that into the solar system, and we'll be able to explore various alternative futures. We're also going to do exercises where we have role playing, where people actually take on different roles as we have this evolution. We've already experimented with this where we had 5 proto-task forces that essentially simulated our idea that we want to do when we have funding in the future, and it worked really well. It was very, very interesting. We also feel like there's going to be so much information and knowledge and different simulations to work with. We're definitely going to make heavy use of artificial intelligence to help us put all of this together. We want to share it very widely because we think everybody on Earth should be part of this central project. As we move to the conclusion, I do want to speak of large-scale space migration. My mentor, Gerard K. O'Neill, had a vision of creating these freestanding space communities where large numbers of people in industry could leave the planet and give planet Earth a chance to recover from the impact of our technological civilization. And if we created these O'Neill communities, which would not be on a planetary surface, we could do so without damaging the ecology of the solar system. That's one option for large-scale space migration. Realistically and logically, humanity at this point must face our choices. We have 3, and maybe a combination of these 3. 1, we can stay home, essentially give up on space exploration. There are voices out there, too expensive, too elitist, too whatever. We should spend all those resources just improving life on planet Earth. It's a reasonable option. We need to do something, and there's general consensus we can't continue the way we are. So we can stay home, have a minimal amount of space-related activities, and focus everything on planet Earth. We can do that and have small-scale space exploration as we have now. We can send missions to Mars. We can send missions to the moon. We could have a community on the far side of the moon. We can make heavy use of robotics and see what we can do to improve life on Earth by extending our reach outward into the solar system. Or we can embrace large-scale space migration, where we imagine millions, if not billions, of people beginning to extend into this larger ecosystem, taking the pressure off of the carrying capacity of the Earth, giving the Earth a chance to breathe. And of course, it's a high-risk endeavor. It's expensive. But you know, one thing we found out, when there's the will to do something big, we can do it. Humans are spending a lot of money on environmental issues and climate change today. We spent a lot of money going to the moon with Apollo. The problem is not capability, the problem is will, and political will in particular. I think essentially the choice is go big or go home. You know, Elon Musk talks about putting 1 million people on Mars, and that's very impressive, and I think he probably can do it. But in terms of impact on the environmental conditions of Earth, 1 million people living on Mars is not going to do much for the Earth. It could be difficult for Mars. We really have to face the choices. And the Human Space Program as an organization is not pushing one perspective or the other. We're trying to show people what the choices really are. And we're trying to expand the number of people involved. So my summary and my conclusions are that whatever name we use, deep space effect, overview effect, ultra view effect, whatever we call it, space exploration will change human understanding of who we are, where we are. The farther we go, the more we're going to evolve, and the more the universe will evolve. But most importantly, we're at an inflection point where we are making choices, even if we're not making explicit decisions about our future, that's a choice. We're just not going to deal with it. So I hope everybody who's listening will join me in trying to let other human beings know that our future as a species, our future as a planet, really depends on what decisions we make today about what we're going to do, how far we're going to go, and what's going to be best for humanity and for all life on planet Earth. And also let people know that with the technology we have today, we're already able to give people really, really profound experiences that are life-changing and potentially very beneficial to humanity. So I'll stop there, and I welcome your comments and your questions.
Thank you, Frank, for your wonderful presentation. You just sketched our possible future, or better, our possible futures, and they are wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we can start with the interviewers. Giulio, you asked to be the first. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Remo. And I'll try to be short because I believe also Stefano is pressed for time. So I have a list of comments and questions that are essentially related to the spiritual, metaphysical, even religious aspects of the deep space effect and in general Frank's work. But I want to say two things before going to that related to today's presentation. So first, Frank, I'm very happy to see you again in a Zoom. This is the second time since December. And I was very happy to see and hear your dog. I believe she's called Macy. My dog died today.
Oh, no.
He was very sick and we had to put it down. And I was thinking about him when you said something very beautiful, which is it is all about love. Now, I think we will need to explore further the implication of this beautiful statement for as far as it relates to space flight and space expansion. But I think this statement already puts us in the right direction, first. Second, I totally agree with your conclusion. It is go big or stay home. If it's only a few space exploration missions now and then I can perfectly understand the reason why many people say it's all a waste of money. We have to spend money on more important things. But if our ultimate objective is large space migration to space, making humanity a multiplanetary species, then instead of a waste of money, it becomes an investment. And I think it does become the most important investment that we can make at this moment. And that is also because of this, let me say, metaphysical points about the deep space effect. Let me start with my own interpretation. To me, the feeling of unity with the universe that you describe embraces the whole of space and time, including the future. Looking at the majestic galaxies out there, I feel close to future humans living among the stars and contributing to cosmic evolution. Looking at deep space, I feel part of our cosmic destiny. We are indeed, as you say, and here I'm quoting, actively encouraged by larger forces to expand into the universe out there and play an important cosmic role among the stars. The universal insight is part of my personal religion, and I seek the deep space effect. I think our duty to God, or to God by any other name, or to the cosmos, or to some cosmic principle that favors life, or to life itself, is to expand beyond the earth into the black sky and support cosmic evolution, as you say. Now, Frank, do you think the universal insight could be incorporated into the value systems of the world traditional religions? Could the integration of the universal insight into the world's traditional religions help humanity go to the stars and support cosmic evolution? Should this integration happen, and how can we make it happen? My second question is, or alternatively, should new religions centered on the universal insight appear and gradually replace traditional religions with maybe new rituals centered on the deep space effect? And I would wondering which one of these two scenarios would you prefer? And my last
Giulio,
question,
can we maybe wait?
And my last question is whether you could elaborate on the parallels and differences between your ideas and the emerging religion that Yuval Harari calls Dataism in his book Homo Deus. Dataism, as defined by Harari, says that the universe consists of data flows, and the value of any phenomenon or entity is determined by its contribution to data processing. Now, this may sound like kind of cold and metallic, but if life is an algorithm and self-awareness is data processing, then the parallel with your ideas are evident. So, Frank, I think you won't have the time to answer all these points. And therefore, since you also mentioned artificial intelligence, I would like you to answer the last one. Could you elaborate on the parallels and the difference between your ideas and those of Yuval Harari?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. There's a lot in what you said. I confirm and concur with a lot of what you said. I do want to say I'm sorry about your dog's passing. Our older dog passed away at the beginning of 2022. And I know, there is a form of love between humans and dogs that's pretty profound. And again, if you've ever had a dog, you might know a little bit about what the overview effect is about, because there is a profound love there. The other thing I would say is, I will say one quick thing about religion. It's very clear the overview effect and all of these changes in consciousness that I've talked about have to do with relating yourself to part of a larger whole. And I think religion and spirituality at their essence are similar. They're about relating to a larger whole system, in some cases called the divine, in some cases called God, and so on. But that understanding of being embedded in something bigger than yourself is critical. Regarding Yuval Harari, I have a great deal of respect for his work. And I find my work on the Cosmo hypothesis to be really similar to Homo Deus, in that in Cosmo, I talk about the universe as a living information system, that consciousness is really an artifact of increasing information processing capability and complexity. And I don't see any really significant points of distinction. One other thing I would say about what he has stated is in his title, Homo Deus. What he is saying is human beings have the ability to behave like gods, and it's time for us to understand the responsibility that entails. And that's very similar to what I was saying at the end. Spaceflight, AI, and the technologies we've created give us godlike powers, but I'm not sure our ethics and our morals and our value systems have caught up. So I think that's one of the critical moments, critical points of inflection right now. You and I probably should talk offline, though. I didn't answer even a 10% of what you mentioned, so.
I look forward to. And thank you very much, Frank.
Thank you.
See you again next time.
All right.
Okay, so Stefano, the floor is yours.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much, Frank, for your very interesting speech. And, you know, I'm really grateful to Moon Village Association for this invitation. And this is the moment of my outcoming. I joined Moon Village Association in the hidden hope that they will drag me to the moon one day on the other. I don't know yours, if you share this desire. And I was, sorry, especially impressed by some things you said, especially the way in which you underlined the meaning of this young girl sentences about the integration of space and Earth. I think that it is very, very important, and it's also something new in relationship to what was the general feeling of the first space age. And also the last part about the way in which we make choices, even if we not decide, it is very important. The first time I thought about what we now call this deep space effect was regarding a picture shooted by the Viking probe, following a suggestion by Carl Sagan, and this is a very well-known photo called the pale blue dot, with this very, very, very small sign of our Earth in this blue color in the spectre of the other colors of the solar system. And once I saw this photograph, you remember probably that Carl Sagan said, "This is home." But it was it really home at this long distance? I think we received a question on the chat, meaning somehow the same thing. That's probably also a feeling of disconnection can be produced by this long distance. We know that when distances in space and time are so big, technical consideration mixed with metaphysical ones, when we think about the speed of light, for instance, or the distance of galaxies. But with deep space effect, I think that the mix is not only with metaphysical questions, but also with existential questions too. Because of course, this connection with the side of our Earth, I beg your pardon, I just took my mother back from the hospital and I have an explosive environment around me. So if you hear voices, accept my excuses.
That's okay.
And so this existential turn is also related, I think, with the rebirth of a feeling that we almost lose on the earth, and that the classical aesthetics call sublime, the feeling of sublime. Because in relationship to beauty, sublime is what Kant called a negative pleasure. Negative because we experience the fall or the defeat of our cognitive capacities, but it is also a pleasure because we discover that we are not only made of cognitive systems. We are also people with an ethical conscience, with another building of ourself that comes from, for instance, ethics, but also with this deep feeling of reason, according to Kant. So something that is almost disappeared on the earth. I remember that an Italian philosopher, Remo Bodei, wrote that probably the rebirth of our sense of sublime could be attached to the moment in which astronauts could explore the universe, but accepting the possibility of not going back. And I think that the deep space effect is perceptually an anticipation of that. So the feeling of not going back, the feeling to be abandoned from the earth, or to have abandoned the earth forever. So this is more a suggestion I want you to comment. And my question is instead about these large-scale migrations you considered, because, you know, until now space has been the migration frontier of super rich and Elon Musk colonization project, for instance, and probably tomorrow it could be that of the poor of the earth. And frankly, I don't know what to fear more, with the risk of reproducing pre-democratic scenarios outside, with slavery, something as Fritz Lang metropolis scenarios, or instead something that can be better. But I think that it's very, very important that people start to consider those perspectives. And I think that your pioneering work on that line is very important. And I wonder if you ever imagined some science fiction social scenarios outside the Earth. Thank you.
Frank?
Yeah, thank you so much. A lot there. I'll kind of start at the end, which is science fiction writers have really been ahead of us for a long time in thinking about these futures. I do enjoy writing fiction, and I have not yet really written that particular novel, the one you're talking about, which would be set in the solar system, you know, as if the human space program had succeeded, and, you know, really imagining what that would look like. However, it's something I'd like to write because I think it might communicate the idea more effectively than a report or anything else we could do, because popular culture does communicate ideas very, very effectively. I want to focus though on your point about the migration becoming a migration of the wealthy. In other words, that the solar system would become a gated community, if you will. Everyone I know in the space movement is opposed to that. Everybody I know involved in the space movement is interested in it because they see it as a possibility of a new beginning, where we don't take our warlike instincts with us, We don't take our colonization inclinations with us. It's not for an elite group. And again, when somebody opposes space exploration because they think it's going to be for billionaires and millionaires, and it's going to be exploitative instead of exploration oriented, I say that could happen. I'm not saying it wouldn't happen, but it's what my friends and I, my colleagues and I are trying to avoid. I don't accept people using the word space colonization because it betrays an old mindset that we're trying to avoid. So for people who want to oppose an interest in the space enterprise because they think it's going to turn out badly, my response is, well, if you get involved, maybe it won't. That goes back to not making a decision, you know. I think it's important. It's very, very important to adopt a philosophy of space for all. And one of the organizations that I admire the most is Astro Access. Astro Access is all about helping to raise our consciousness about people with so-called disabilities having access to the space environment. So there's a lot going on, and I'll stop there because I hear there's some questions in the Q&A, but I keep coming back to choice.
Sorry, Frank. Let me say we didn't make only one philosophy on one Earth figure out in the space.
Yeah, there are going to be many new space philosophies. You're right about that. But it's good for you and me because there can be a lot of space philosophers, right?
Great. Okay, Giuseppe, it's your turn.
Okay, well, of course, thank you to everyone. And of course, thank you, of course, to Frank. I have 2 comments and 2 questions. So the first comment is what Frank described in his human space program. Basically, he has it in front of him the first step of the implementation. It's called the Moon Village. The Moon Village is precisely, exactly the implementation of the first step of what you're looking for. So,
right.
So you don't have to go very far. You don't have to invent too much stuff. I think is the first step, because I would like to also quantify, because the exploration of around the Earth has not been coordinated.
Right.
Everyone has made on his own. At the moment is the same also for the moon, but that's
right.
exactly what we are trying to bring on the same denominator with the Moon Village.
Right.
And Village Association is exactly that, to get on the same platform so that the people could basically implement and complement each other. So I think, so my short question is, please, maybe you should look in possible way to create synergy, because many of the things which you're looking for a bit of a distant future, you have it in front of us, and the Moon Village is the first step in that direction. So that is the first comment. Later on, maybe you can tell me what you think. Then the second comment is the fact that when you compare the overview effect and the deep space effect, then this it's the ideal way to differentiate between different transition of human exploration, because the overview effect is where you can still see the Earth in a meaningful way.
Right.
Everything else is deep space effect. So in reality, when you will go beyond the moon, and so that's what I mean is the transition. So till the moon, you can consider there is an overview effect, okay?
Right.
When you go beyond the moon, that is it. There is not any longer an overview effect, and the transition is to the deep space effect. So
right.
One way to classify, I'm just bringing you a new idea, one way to classify future mission, it will be overview effect related mission and deep space related mission. So I think
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what you
I
think,
agree with
but
that.
this
Yeah.
seems to be quite logical. And indeed, the deep space effect mission are going to be the large majority of the mission when you exclude the lunar ecosystem. Okay, so
Right.
so these are my first two comments. Then I come to the question. So the question are, we discussed a little bit beforehand. There has been 6 astronauts, 6 only astronauts in the world, which have been orbiting the moon. Well, because of course Apollo 13, we cannot say that orbited the moon. They had other issues in front of them.
Yeah.
So let's take the 6 nominal mission. So there has been therefore only 6 astronauts that were around the moon, and therefore they experienced during being on the other side of the moon, the dark side of the moon, this effect. So the question is would be whether you have been investigating those, or maybe it's never too late to do that, because that aspect maybe was not so important at that point in time, because we were looking more towards the newly born overview effect. Okay, so maybe that is maybe a question that you want to answer. And the final question is, you did not mention amongst the let's say Blue Origin astronaut the very negative experience that the Star Trekker commander had related to the deep, so-called deep space effect in suborbital flight. So I understand that is belonging to a 90 years old human, but nevertheless, I think it's an interesting, and I don't think we should just discard it because we don't like what people say. We should
Right.
like, getting away some data which we don't want to see, that this does not exist. So, okay, so I stop there. So up to you what you were able to comment. Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, we'd love to have the Moon Village Association involved with the...
Frank, sorry to interrupt you. I'm really sorry, but I have to disconnect. So thank you very much. I hope to see you all again. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Frank.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you.
I
Bye.
must also disconnect, but it was really great to talk to you guys. I'll catch it on YouTube tomorrow and see you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Julio.
Okay, Giulio. Bye. Thank you.
Sorry, you were saying? Sorry about that.
Yes, Frank.
We'd love to have Moon Village involved with the Human Space Program. We should talk about that. Love to do that. And I agree with what you said about it. I like your differentiation of missions would either be overview effect related or deep space effect related. That's a great dichotomy. Let's see. Remind me of your first question now.
The six astronaut, it's Apollo.
Right, of course. Yes, I'm so glad you brought it up. It's been a problem in my mind. What about those 6 guys? They must have a story to tell. Honestly, I couldn't think of a good reason to focus on them, but you've given me one. Now I will look into them from the deep space effect perspective. So thank you. We can work together on that. It's a great idea.
And
Regarding,
yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So regarding Shatner, his reaction is really interesting. It seems negative. On the other hand, the more you unpack it, the more it seems like it's not necessarily, in the sense that he, in seeing the immensity of the universe, he kept calling it the blackness. What happened was it created grief in his mind for what we're doing to the earth. He saw this contrast between this beautiful planet, ideally suited for humanity, and dogs and deer and dolphins. And he saw there was nothing else like it, and he began grieving for the fate of the earth. In some ways, it's a positive experience, in the sense that he came out of it wanting to know, what can I do to support the earth? I do agree with you, though. His reaction to the cosmos, calling it death, is quite different from, say, Chris Bosshausen, who felt drawn to it. And his reaction was not universal. Many astronauts have said they felt at home in the universe, they felt drawn to it. It made them want to explore more. I think it does have, I think it does have something to do with his stage of life. I mean, I'm no spring chicken, guys. The older you get, the more you think about mortality and everything you see. I don't think you have to, but it is a common experience. So I'm not sure that that was part of what happened for him, but I guess I would conclude by saying we need to look at every astronaut experience, and if it's not what we want, we shouldn't throw it away. It's data. I guess we have some other questions, Arthur.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Frank, for your excellent presentation, and the other people who've just left as well. I just have one small comment, and we were talking about, you mentioned science fiction, and there's a book that's just come out not too long ago called Delta V by Daniel Suarez, and actually it's a group of asteroid miners. They're 60 million kilometers from the Earth, and the Earth is just a speck in the sky. But what happens several times in this book is they're out and they're exposed to the immense cosmos and all of the beauty of what we've seen, and they just stop and are just totally blown away by this experience. It happens several times in the books. I think I just like to suggest that book for anybody. It's a very exciting book anyway. And his second book called Critical Mass is also very exciting. So it's a new person writing right now in this area. So anyway, we do have some interesting questions. Do you see these, or should I read them verbatim to see?
Let me look in the chat.
We have Saba. She's an active member on our Moon Village, and she's working on her PhD, and she's inspired by the overview effect. But she asked, is related to this emotional shift when you're further from the Earth. Could this effect have the opposite impact, causing one to be disconnected or feeling of disassociation, that you're not just totally connected to the Earth, but you're disconnected, So
yeah, I know Saba. Hi, Saba. I think so. I think it could have that effect. It may well be an evolutionary necessity that the further away humans travel from Earth, the less connected they feel, because you're going to have to become resilient and independent. You're not really going to be able to depend on the Earth for your survival. And I could see, I don't think it'll happen as much on the Moon, which is close. And you can really, if you choose to travel from the far side to the near side, you can certainly see the Earth, and you can most likely return. But there could be the opposite impact, which is you could feel more and more connected and become almost mystical about the Earth, because it has everything you don't have out there. Remind me, when I was here before, and I'll do this quickly, did I talk about my experience living in Germany in the 1950s when my father was in the army?
No.
Did I talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the 1950s, my father was called back into the army. We lived in Germany on a base of 25,000 Americans. We created a little America in the middle of Germany. The young people who were there mostly didn't want to be there. They were there because their parents had to be there. We had a mystical view of the states. We couldn't see the United States. We really didn't have any media by which we could connect to it, but it was where everything was good. You could get all the food you wanted. You could go to a baseball game. You could do all these things that we, quote unquote, couldn't do. Now, I thought it was really great being in Germany. We traveled, we saw castles, we went to France, and I thought it was really a wonderful place. But my point is, spontaneously, the young people longed to go back. And so I could see two dramatically different reactions to being on Mars or being further out, being an asteroid miner. One could be, Earth is perfect, I want to go there, and the other could be, who cares about Earth?
Yes, Frank, Arthur, there are...
Yeah, we have another question. It's kind of, the first one is from an anonymous person. He says, do you think that once space travel becomes common, that we would just get used to having this effect and the overview effect would not be so powerful?
I do believe that will happen. Yes.
It becomes just...
That was my assumption when I first had the idea of it, that it would be common, it would be ordinary. If you lived on the moon, on the near side of the moon, I have to be careful now. If you live on the near side of the moon, you would just, seeing the Earth in the sky would not be dramatic, especially if you were born there. And I do think it'll happen. And I think that's okay, because I think the understanding of the Earth as a whole system where everything is interconnected and interrelated, it'll just be a part of these future space people, and they'll just be at a higher level of philosophical understanding than we are today, because we're struggling to see the connectivity of everything. You know, we just had a horrible earthquake in Turkey. I think the natural reaction, if you're an American, is, that's terrible. I should do something. I should give money to the Red Cross, but I don't know anyone there. You know what I'm saying? We don't automatically say, those are my crewmates on Spaceship Earth. And you know, it just, the connectivity of things isn't present for us. And I do think that that realization of interconnection will remain, but it won't be the shock that astronauts have felt when they leave and they look back and they cry and they have this new understanding.
We have another question. Do you think that the driver of mass space migration might be the economical and societal reasons that we have now, because we have a degrading conditions on Earth, that this might be a motivation to actually go into space?
Yeah, I do. I've used the analogy before in the United States of the discovery of oil in North Dakota. Of course, most of the people I know don't want to use fossil fuels, so we'll just put that aside for a moment. You might be opposed to it, but a lot of people go to North Dakota to work because there's economic opportunity there. And I do believe that if we are able to understand how to create value off the planet, that people will be drawn there. And one of the points that should be made when we move from mission to migration, when you go on a space mission, you think about, what kind of people do we need? What kind of skills do they have to have? When you start talking about migration, you have to do the same thing. And it isn't going to be engineers and physicists and astronaut type people. If you're going to create communities out there, you will need every kind of person. And there are regions of the planet where unemployment's incredibly high. And even though the conditions might not be perfect, I could see people leaving for the same reasons they leave their home on Earth. I mean, there are people who migrate purely to better their lives. And the challenge right now is, what would that value be if you were living off the planet? What would it be? How would these space communities make money and add value and pay people? But I do think it could be a very big motivator for migration.
Okay, we are just very close to the end, but Giuseppe, maybe you want to add some comments?
No, I think today, I think we had a very good second step. So as we have discussed, we have already paved the way forward for a number of further activities. So we have given some homework to Frank about the 6 astronauts, as well as possibility also to see how connection between his organization and MVA could take place in a very practical way. So I think this goes in the direction, basically, and we have to see whether the next webinar will have to be a bit more focused or a little bit more generic. Maybe you can discuss with us the result of the 6 astronauts. So, but we will discuss probably offline, maybe with Frank and Remo or Art, maybe in the next week or so, a little bit more operational, how we can move forward. I will just make one final observation, at least from my side, which is something which I always had in mind, which is basically will explain from the origin of humankind the reason why we explore. Some of the people indicated the gene of exploration. Reality is a bit more practical for me. It is called survival. Basically, the possible red line, which maybe go along, and of course I'm not neither a biologist or any kind of, but it looks to me that from the beginning of life, the arrow has been towards maximizing the survival. Basically, in everything has been done on the physical level, on the cultural level, which then ends up also people change job to gain more money. Why the money? Because they have more chance to go further, to have kids, to give a better education. So in a way, the red line seems to be the survival. How to maximize, and this is probably somehow in the DNA when people talk about the gene of the exploration, maybe inside the gene of the exploration, there is even more primordial, which is the survival. And so if that is the case, then you have to talk about the exploration as a natural consequence to maximize the probability of surviving. And so that's something, I don't know if you have any quick comment of that. Maybe I'm not the first one to mention about this, but what do you think, Frank? Is that something which makes sense or is totally?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I would say I'm in total agreement with you on that. I think exploration is a very natural tendency of life, not just humans, but we are a manifestation of that tendency. I agree, totally.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that it was a very fruitful conversation, and I hope that there will be more opportunities to talk about the deep space effect. Frank, thank you. Let's be in touch.
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you to everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.